All right. We good? Let's see. Are people? Yeah. Wow. It's filling up fast. Look at that. I'm excited, Ty. How about you?
I'm more than excited.
Me too. I'm really, really thrilled about it. I'm sorry we couldn't do it last week. We got back from Disney World, me and my family, and the wheels were completely off. My wife was sick, our 11-year-old was sick. It was a disaster. So I appreciate you guys being patient with me. I really wanted to do this right. So I'm thrilled. We'll give people a few minutes to come in. I want to introduce you to Tyler. If you do not know Tyler, Tyler is the greatest comic book assistant in the world. And he is the one that really puts all of the kind of circuitry and wiring of this class together. He uploads everything. He makes sure that the newsletter has all of the links. He organizes everything, and he and his friend Noah run the Discord together. So if you're just joining us for the first time, there's a big Discord. How many people are in it now?
1,500.
There's like 1,500 people in the Discord alone that share work, go back and forth. It's moderated by them just to make sure that people are kind, people are generous, all of that stuff. So it's a great place to go. We can put the link for the Discord in the post, right?
Yeah.
So everyone has it. All right. So I just wanted to, you okay?
Yeah, no, just make sure everyone can talk in the chat, because now people
Yes,
can.
We want full involvement, full engagement from you guys. That's his hand still, not mine, sneaking in. But the reason I've been so excited about this class, to be honest, like this one in particular, 102, but the whole thing is just, I really believe that, this last year for me, not to get too on the couch, but you'll see if you're new to the class and new to showing up, I try and be as transparent as possible, not only about my career and any questions that you have about, hardships or, achievements or any of that kind of stuff. I try and be as open and honest as I can without throwing shade, without being petty or any of that stuff, but talk about real ups and downs and all of it. And talk about my personal life too. But when I stepped away from DC a couple of years ago, it was terrifying for me, especially it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And coming over to do things that were passion projects with other creators that I was inspired by and my friends over at Comixology and Image and IDW and that stuff was terrifying. And, the fact that you guys showed up and made those books so successful so far just means the world. And it reconnected me to the idea of the kind of writer I want to be. And teaching has always been a really big part of that. And it's a part that I couldn't do for a few years. I did it at DC as long as I could, and through their writers workshop program and all of that stuff. But it was something I missed dearly. And having you not only show up to support the books, but show up and have the class grow over the course of the year. I mean, when we started, I never expected to have a fraction of the people we have in this class. So the idea that we have literally, thousands of people, just I'm so happy and committed and excited about this thing. I want to keep it going as long as you guys will, because the truth is teaching, the reason I love it is it keeps you young as a writer. It reconnects me to my own priorities. I tell you these things that I believe about writing, and then I can't go home and be a hypocrite about it and be like, well, I told you all this shit, but I'm going to go home and not do it myself. Right. So, and secondly, this is totally true, I promise you, but there is no better feeling than having someone come through class with you or help them in any small way, and then have them turn into a writer that then you learn from down the road. People that I was lucky enough to have in class at different times, James Tynan and Matt Rosenberg and Phil Kennedy and Vita Ayala and Mags, and now I learn from them. I mean, all the time. So I really appreciate you letting me do this. I love it. And I really want your feedback. So I want you to tell me anything you think could be better about the class, anything missing, any of that. So we're going to do it from my studio. We usually do it, or we wanted to do it from Fourth World Comics, my local comic shop. I love them. They're over in Smithtown, New York. But the owner, Terrence, who's a longtime friend, all my friends there, just had a baby. His wife just had a baby. So it's a little hectic, and I didn't want to impose this week. So I figure we'll be back there soon. I'm going to, show off their amazing store. And if you're anywhere near Smithtown, New York, you got to go. I've been going there since before I broke into comics. So it was I remember the day I ran in and was like, I have a chance to pitch for actually one of the stories that I gave you guys today, the Human Torch. So the thing is, here's what's different about 102. Okay, so if you're new and you're trying 102 and you didn't do 101, in class one, in comic writing 101, we generally looked at things that were good examples or strong examples of variations on techniques of craft, right? So we would look at a couple stories that were examples of how to do characterization, and different sort of approaches, but both really effective. And so it was always about looking at work that looking at work that was sort of prime examples of how to effectively apply different techniques. And we had subject by subject characterization, emotional conflict for plot versus plot conflict, villains, all kinds of stuff. If you sign up for the class after this free one, all of that stuff is available to you. It's all video archived. You can watch all of it. So I'm going to reference a few things today that we talked about last year, without getting too deep into them, and you can always go look them up. But what's different about this year is we're going to be using your work. Okay. And for me, I can't tell you how much more helpful I think this class will be for you. I mean, because of that, not just because if it's your work that's getting reviewed, but where I really learned the nuts and bolts of writing wasn't in the classes, the master classes, where I was looking at fantastic work. That was inspiring. Don't get me wrong. When I read like everything from Frank Miller and Mike Mignola to, Dennis Johnson and Ray Carver, but it was like, when I saw the way a good teacher in class, not that I'm so good, but a good teacher could guide a discussion around a piece that a student had submitted and showed the different ways that piece could be improved. That's where it gives you, in my opinion, a lens through which to view others' work, to view your work that needs constructive criticism. And it helps you develop a whole set of tools to apply to your stuff. It gives you a critical eye to approach your own work with. It's, to me, really priceless. It's not just figuring out what's working. It's looking at things that aren't working as well as they could and how to sort of improve them. Okay. So what we're going to do today is give kind of an example class where I'm going to use my early work as the work submitted that we could improve on. And I'll walk you through how the class will work when we get to your work. Now, just so you understand, you can start submitting your work now. We have our contract up there. I've signed it. It's prepared. We're going to give a shout out to the amazing entertainment lawyer who created it. What's the full site? Gamal Hennessy. Yes, we're going to put the link in the thing, but thank you so much, Gamal. And also it's signed. So what it does is it's a really standard contract. You can ask your lawyer, you can show it to anyone you want. But essentially, it absolves us from any kind of legal vulnerability if we use your story and someone out there in the world copies it or does something like that. Obviously, I'm not going to copy your stories. But anyway, the point is, if you want to submit to class, just be aware that there are thousands of people watching this and they will see your work. And generally, I've never had a bad experience with this. I haven't had as many people in class before. But these are the kinds of contracts that are signed when you do this at DC, when you do this in general. So that what you're submitting is open for discussion, and we're protected over here in being able to talk about it freely. So feel it out. If you don't feel comfortable with that, don't submit your work. Don't worry about it. If you do feel comfortable with it, start submitting. And we're going to be looking at stuff that's actual indie comics, that are comics that are visual and that you have art for. We'll be looking at stuff that's just script, because I want to do that too. So really just submit stuff, and what we're going to do is vet it and figure out what is going to make a really good lesson for that day. Okay. So here's the other thing. If you were in 101, I want you to change your thinking right now. Okay. Change the way you're going to approach stuff. You need to kind of imagine that suddenly we're no longer only looking at stuff that's under a glass, sort of under a glass case or bagged and board, because it's, examples of stuff that are working. We're now going to be looking at work where your colleagues have submitted it and they're in this class with you. This is going to be like a real workshop. Okay, the way that I took them in college and in grad school and ran them for years at teaching. And what that means is you have to completely change your priorities walking in the door from the way the class was in 101. So for 102, what I need you to do is imagine we're reading work together that somebody in the class has submitted. So it requires a different sort of calculus. And that calculus is this. the rules of the class as a writer are always the same as 101, right? What I'm asking you to do if you're going to write stuff and submit it, or if you're just going to write stuff for yourself, is to always write the story that you would love to pick up and read that day. That's the golden rule. Always write the thing that would make you happiest to find that day. That's it. And the second rule, the only other rule as a writer for me in this is try to be the most exciting writer to yourself at all times, the bravest, the most daring, somebody that you're proud of. Okay, that's it. That's it, writing wise. Okay, that stays the same. The new set of rules is this: when you're approaching someone's work, here are the 4 criteria that I want you to use. And I put them in the post, but I want to really reiterate it here because a workshop only functions if you guys are able to kind of change your thinking, check your taste at the door, check your opinions at the door, your political opinions, your fiction opinions, your cultural opinions, everything, and come in this way, okay? You read something and you say to yourself, number 1, the most important question, what is this person, the creator, trying to say with this story? What is the story trying to achieve? What's it about? That. What is the core thing this story is trying to communicate? What's it about? Okay. Once you get, that's number 1. Number 2, once you figure that out for yourself, and you could be wrong, it doesn't matter, but what your assumption is, because it's good if you're a writer and somebody misinterprets it, to hear that, to realize I need to shore that up and make sure my message is better communicated. Okay. But the idea is, what I want you to do is have your thesis about what this story is about. Okay. Use that as the foundation to say, given what this story is about, what's working really well? And I want you to comment on those things. I want you to say, you know what, given what I think you're going for, here's some stuff that I think is working really effectively, right? Then part 3, given what you're going for, here's some stuff that isn't working as well for me. Okay. And then part 4, almost as, probably the most important part beyond part 1, is given what's not working well and what is working well, how are we going to improve the story? How are we going to fix what's not working so well to make it work better, like the stuff that's working effectively? And how do we offer constructive criticism on how to get it there on its terms? So the on its terms part is key, right? It's not about, hey, this story has a lot of romance and I don't like romance, so I think that doesn't fit. It's not. If you're in a class with somebody who's writing romance and you're reading that, then your job is to make it the best romance story possible. Yeah, even if you hate horror, which, come on, you shouldn't hate horror. But if you do, that's okay. If I write a horror story and I submit it, your job is to help me make it the scariest fucking story of all time. And that's it. So you have to be able to check your opinions and taste and all of that at the door in order to help your fellow writer get their story to the place they want it to be. Even if you disagree with the opinions in it in some way, that's the goal. Okay. So that's absolutely crucial for a functioning workshop. And whether it's in person or online, that's what a community of writers does for each other. I read stories by my friends, and sometimes I do not like, I don't like what they're saying about a character. I don't agree with maybe their take on Batman, right? But they're submitting a story that's about something about Batman that I feel as though I feel I wouldn't say about Batman. Sorry, Ty's just coming to fix something.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No worries.
1 second. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Anyway, the point is, you okay?
Yeah,
everything good?
Yeah, everything's good.
Okay. It's all right. Don't worry about any of it. It's totally fine. The idea is your job is to help make that story the strongest it can be on its own terms, period. You know what I mean? And that's how a functioning workshop really gets off the ground. That's what writers do for each other. Like I was saying, I read stories by friends that are writing characters that I love. And sometimes they have a take that is really different than mine that I don't agree works. But I understand that my job really is to help them make it the best, it can be on its terms and put it out into the world on their terms. And that's it. So that's what I'm asking of you guys. Okay. So today, what we're going to focus on is the short form. Okay, a little bit. We're going to look at a couple examples that are 8-pagers, because the thing is, like, 8-page stories are probably what you're going to be invited to do as a first gig at Marvel or DC. A lot of the time, it's all you can afford to produce of a comic to show to people. 8 pages can be enough. 8 pages when I was doing indie comics and pitching American Vampire and that stuff, the rubric that I was given was, can you make 8 pages of comic, 8 pages of script, hopefully 8 pages of art with that script if you can do it. But even a short can get to the core elements of what you're trying to say with your independent series or with a licensed character. So the goal is to really to try your best today to think about that form in such a way that you feel like you have a good handle on how to approach it for your own work, and if you were given a task, because the hope is you get both, right? If that's what you want to do. Now, when it comes to how I break a story down like that, I'll show you. One of the things I want you to know, if you're in 101, you know this, but if you're new and you're taking 102, everything I tell you in this class is my opinion. Everything is, and every rule, or every, not even a rule, but every kind of conventional blueprint I give you for a technique, when I talk about 3-act structure, when I talk about inciting incident, when I talk about serialization, anything I talk about, I'm using sort of big conventional expected sort of mechanics of Western culture storytelling, right? So what I'm giving you is kind of the things that are the most commonly used, most commonly expected techniques that and craft elements that you'll find in a story, whether it's a short story or this and that, or a longer story, and we'll go through those. Now, can you break those rules? 100%. I break them. You know, you can think of movies, as I'm going to tell you these things, like a 3-act structure thing that, you know, upend those ideas. So none of it is hard and fast, but understanding the expectations around storytelling, understanding sort of the skeletal aspects of what makes sort of a 3-act narrative. All of that stuff helps you because you understand when you break those rules, what the effect is on a reader. Okay. So anyway, so for an 8-pager, the conventional wisdom, again, so here I'm getting into like the expectations and the rules, are you really only have time for kind of one thought, one idea. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't try to have more in there. I've done stories where I've tried to put more in there too. But the general idea is you have room to do one thing really well, like one emotional revelation, one, you know, sort of epiphany, one message that you're communicating. You only have essentially what's less than half of a normal issue by far to do all of it. Okay. So you need to be like laser-like focused. You need to be like crystal diamond vision of like, this is what I'm trying to say. Does that mean every story has to follow the same format? No, not at all. But I'm giving you kind of, again, the sort of most, I think the most sort of basic way to do it so that you have the building blocks to then expand from. Okay. So, given that you have room for one like emotional revelation, first, what I want to do is kind of look at a story that I think I did more recently, that a couple of stories that I did more recently that I think sort of follow these tenets. Okay. So what I try and do, and I'll break down my process for you. And again, like my process doesn't need to be your process at all. If what you need is something different than what I'm telling you, follow your own heart. Meaning I have a friend, a really good friend writer, who if he knows the ending of his story, he can't do it because it's too boring for him. He has to figure it out on the way. And then he goes back and he rewrites it now knowing the ending. But his first draft, he does not know it. For me, I need to know the ending before I start a first draft. That's just who I am. So again, format wise, take or leave whatever I'm saying. If it doesn't work for you or it does work for you, cherry pick it, whatever you want. The sort of structures that I use are the lessons that the things that I try and apply to comics are lessons that I've learned in multiple media of fiction writing. I love storytelling across the board. I've been lucky enough to try and to get to do it for film a little bit. I wrote a couple of screenplays to get to do it for TV with Witches and with Ty and all that stuff for the Witches TV show, which hopefully we'll find out about a green light soon. And for comics, and I came from fiction as well. So, you know, for me, I just love the mechanics of storytelling in all different forms. And so the lessons that I'm bringing to it aren't just about comics. What I try and do is give you sort of lessons about storytelling priorities that are cross genre so that you understand the tools and you understand the mechanics of storytelling well enough that you can learn the format. If somebody says to you, well, screenplay has a slightly different shape. It doesn't matter if it has a different shape, if it's 120 pages versus 60 pages, which you're used to by doing 3-issue arcs in comics, because you understand the priorities of storytelling and the sensibilities of emotional character-driven storytelling well enough that you can make that adjustment. It's more just cosmetic than anything else. That's the way it feels when you get the fundamentals down, when you get the foundational stuff down, okay? That's really what it is, okay? So for me, if the assignment was, and we're going to look at a story first, this 1,000-word story, right? It's from Batman Black and White. It came out a few years ago. Not that it's so amazing or any of that stuff. None of everything I've done, and believe me, I look at it and I'm like, I wish I had done this better, that better. That never goes away. But I think at least in this zone, it handles things effectively enough that I feel comfortable using it as an example of this kind of thinking. All right. So for this, before I show it to you, the assignment was essentially a Batman Black and White story that's going to bookend the book. They wanted it to be the last one. And I had just finished Batman. I had finished all the stuff that I had done on Batman and all the stuff that I'd done on All-Star Batman. And I wanted to say one last thing. But I also felt really exhausted and felt like, I don't know, did it make sense what I did? Did the run make sense? Did I communicate what I wanted to communicate, which was, we really tried to rebuild Batman in our own way, me and Greg, that was about, instead of the Batman I grew up with, whom I love, who I love. Like I love Frank Miller's Batman and Denny O'Neil's Batman and all those Batman. And we wanted to make one in the kind of post 9/11 world that my kids were growing up in, that was less about kind of scaring bad people back into the shadows and taking back the city than inspiring good people out into the light and to be their best selves. And we tried to put a lot of threats in that run. There were stand-ins for things that I worry about for my kids. Random violence was the Red Hood Gang and 0 Year and all kinds of imagery that sort of references, sometimes subtly, sometimes not, things that I know my kids are afraid of, so that Batman could make them brave in the face of their own fears. That was the goal. But at this point, I'm like, God, did I do a good job? I have no idea. You don't know. You're too close to it. And so I wanted to do a story that was about somebody wondering at the end of their career, having followed Batman in some way, did anything they do make any sense? Did anything they do communicate something meaningful? And you're too close to it to tell. Okay, so that was my goal. I wanted to tell that story. So now let's say that's the assignment. You have 8 pages and you want to tell that story. Well, what do you do? Do you tell a story? And what the other thing I had realized was, as a black and white story paired with John Romita, who's a friend, he lives actually like throwing distance from my house. He actually, the other day I was joking with Ty. I was like running on the road. I love you, John. I've told you this story. I'm not throwing shade or whatever, but I was running on the road and he was coming down in his convertible down the road. And I saw him and I was like, John, and he didn't see me. And I swear to God, I felt like I'm going to get run over by John Romita Jr. And it's not a bad way to go. It really would be okay. But I I didn't have to dive off the road or anything like that. But I was like, John, it's me. He's like, but then I saw him at CVS and he was, the nicest guy ever. And everyone in town loves him and he's awesome. But because I was paired with him on this, I knew I wanted to do something not only black and white, but that was really ink based in a way that would give him a lot of versatility. So I was like, well, a lot of room to play in just black and white because his inks are so strong. I mean, he pencils and then he's inked over, but his line work and the line work he evokes from whoever's working with him ink-wise, Danny or whoever, is like really great. So I was like, well, a photographer. I wanted to be about a photographer who's photographed Batman throughout his career and doesn't know which photograph in that way means something to Batman, or which sort of photograph Batman sort of sees as himself, in that way. And it's really because this character is questioning the meaning of his own life in that way, right? So I have that. Okay, so that's what I do. Is first, what am I trying to say? What am I feeling? What do I want to explore? And you always try and go for something that's about your own hopes and fears, your own worries, your own anxieties, all of that. So that's what I mean is you got to be able to, the only way you're going to make anything original with these characters, I'm telling you, is to be vulnerable, to pull something out of yourself that talks about why they're important to you by making this hero brave in the face of something that terrifies you. That's it. Like, you know, I've said it before, but Death of the Family was literally about us having a second kid and me feeling like I was a terrible father because I was worried that my career was just taking off and I was scared that having another kid after the first kid was a lot, you know, was going to take me away from work too much and that I was going to be a bad dad anyway. And all of that stuff was what the Joker is saying to Batman. Oh, you don't want to have a family. But the point I'm trying to make is you can't be afraid to be afraid on the page. Ultimately, you know, if you're going to work, especially if you're going to do licensed stuff, but with your own stuff too, everything is fans can tell when it's fake, man. You've got to be able to get out there and say, this is what excites me. This is what worries me. This is what, okay. So you start there. So for this Shutter Bat, where am I? Oh, I'm worried that nothing I did means anything. You know, I don't know if it meant anything. Did I say what I wanted to say? That's where I'm at. So I want to tell a story about that in black and white. Photographer has taken many pictures of Batman over the years. Which one matters? Okay. I'll pull it up here. You guys can see it? You can see it, Ty? Okay, I'm taking a sip of this coffee before. Okay. I love this image so much, by the way. All right. So as I'm showing it to you, what I wanted to say is, so you know what? I'm actually going to back up for a second. Okay. I'm going to show you something else first. Here. Scars Testament, Dropbox image. Let me see. Is this it? This is it. Here we go. Can you see the 3-act structure?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So for those of you that were in 101, you've seen this, you know what I'm about to say a little bit. For those of you interested in taking the class, there's a whole class on 3-act structure. I'm not going to go deep into it here, but I'm going to use it for a second just to sort of give you a tool to start thinking about what moment you choose if you're doing an 8-page story or a short based on the emotional impact of the different points in the narrative. What do you want to communicate? What's the best point in the story to show? Okay. So here. Okay. So what 3-act structure is, for those of you that don't know, it's essentially kind of a really boiled down, simple kind of ruler that you use in a way to kind of measure a story that uses kind of Western storytelling conventions over the course of about 120 pages, over the course of about 2 to 3 hours. It's essentially what all movies use in one form or other. There's a Mark Harmon form of it that's the circles format. Dan Harmon one. Mark Harmon I love from the 80s. Dan Harmon structure that's the circles one. There's the Save the Cat. There's a bunch of different versions. This is, to me, the one I like because it's so simple. Okay. And it's from all the old screenplay books from the 90s and that stuff, and it's been updated, but it's still used this way. You'll find it really pretty unchanged. And most screenplay people you'll find know this inside and out. Okay. So the idea is that this takes place over the course of about 120 pages, which is the length of a screenplay or the length of a 6-issue arc, okay, of comics. All right. And it's not the thing I want you to understand really clearly is it's not a plot model. That's the thing that I got wrong for years and didn't understand. And most people get wrong too. It's not about plot. It's not about things happening to your character, except at one point. There's only one point in the whole thing where there's something happening to your character. Everything else on here is decisions that your character makes. It's emotional gateways your character goes through as they actively decide to do things, okay, and realize things and all of that. It's not plot, it's character. And I used this before, but it's almost like the example that is the easiest in my mind because it's so wedded together. But I mean, all the kind of movies, big action movies, big blockbuster movies, big James Cameron, all that stuff, they wed those things together really closely. Plot and emotional arc really closely. So the biggest things happen in plot, aliens invade or the queen, monster attacks. at the same point that the character is going through something emotionally in a big way. And often that monster is an extension of those things, whatever it is. But it's important for you to separate them in your mind. So this is not plot, this is emotion. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is this, like, if you think about a movie like Titanic, okay, which my kids, it's always on and off in our house, which I know is whatever, but especially with Avatar coming back, like where the James Cameron stuff is like floating around all the time now. But the plot of that movie, okay, is different than the emotional arc. If the main character is Kate Winslet as Rose, the points on this thing are all about her kind of emotional turning points, right? So here, let me show you the structure, and then I'll walk you through with a movie like Titanic. I'll walk you through with a movie like Die Hard or Terminator, whatever. You can tell I'm a child of the 80s, but still. This part here is showing what your character is struggling with in one way or another before they have a chance to change it. It's your intro. It's where your character is on their emotional arc, right? So this is in this moment, like Kate Winslet is struggling with her family, being engaged to someone she doesn't love and feeling trapped. This. It introduces your character, not who they are, but where they are on their emotional arc, what they're struggling with, the conflict of the story is going to have them engage with and wrestle with, what thing they're dealing with. Sarah Connor, she's feeling like a failure and a nobody, and that she's not succeeding here, and that she has no skills. This is her as the waitress, da 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 da. Tony Stark and Iron Man, this is Tony being a selfish bastard at the beginning and not caring about anybody, and being a weapons lord and all that stuff at the beginning of Iron Man 1, right? All these things. You see what I'm saying? This is all that, right? Dark Knight Returns, this is where Bruce Wayne is wandering the streets feeling lost at the beginning after toasting with Jim Gordon, saying that he doesn't know what's become of him in the city and all of this stuff, okay? This is where they are in terms of the conflict they're going to be wrestling with later in the story. Something about 15 minutes in to the movie, 15 pages into a 120-page screenplay, or something towards the end of issue 1 or halfway through the issue 1 of a 12-issue arc, a 6-issue arc, will happen. This is the only thing that happens to your character. It will present an opportunity to face their fears in some way, or go on a journey that will make them confront the thing they're struggling with, or trying to get away from, or dealing with in those first 15 minutes. Okay, those first 15 pages. So this is where Kate Winslet meets Leonardo DiCaprio. You know what I'm saying? Something happens to them that opens a doorway in that way. This is where Sarah Connor finds out that other Sarah Connors are being killed. Something changes. Do you know what I mean? In a story that opens up a path that's steering them towards the opportunity here at the end of Act 1 to begin their journey, to make the decision to take Kyle Reese's hand, to make the decision to meet Jack, Dawson, Leonardo DiCaprio at the clock, and abandon your family for that night to go on the journey. This is where Iron Man, where Tony Stark decides, you know what, my experiences in that cave with that doctor changed me, and now I'm going to be a hero. That's what happens 30 minutes, 30 pages in, generally, that kind of thing. Disney movies follow it really close. This is where Rapunzel leaves the tower. This is where Flynn Rider shows up. We're big Disney fans at our houses. It just is. It is what it is. The Titus smirking at me. That's that. So here, now this part is rising action. This is where your character is facing more and more sort of difficult obstacles that represent that force working against them. This is where Kate Winslet's family is more and more sort of against her with Jack Dawson. This is where, Tony Stark is running up against the William Hurt character and all of the challenges of being a hero given his whole legacy. This is where Sarah is being pursued by the Terminator and seeing that she's worse and worse equipped to do this in that way. Okay. Then halfway through, they'll usually reach something called a point of no return, where they make a decision to go forward, even though going forward would mean there's no going back. In Titanic, this is a good example of plot versus emotional trajectory. The plot at that exact moment is the ship hits the iceberg. Okay, that's what people would cite a lot of the time as the point of no return. If you say, what's the point of no return Titanic? Oh, the ship hits the iceberg, but it's not. That's just plot. The ship hits the iceberg is an event. The point of no return is that that's where Kate Winslet sleeps with Leonardo DiCaprio and decides they're going to leave together and she's never going back to her fiance. That's the point of no return. And the thing to understand is that plot can be adjusted to fit however. The whole movie Titanic could happen before the iceberg if you want a real tragedy. The whole movie Titanic could happen before they even get on the Titanic. The whole movie could happen in the lifeboat, you know what I'm saying, in some way. If the emotionality is are the sort of the anchors along the way. Everything else, plot is adjustable to better heighten the emotion of your story, the impact of your story. And once you understand that, you become really flexible and fluid with assignments. Someone will come to you and say, you don't have 6 issues, you have 3. Okay, well, I know what the most important points are in my story emotionally. I can fit that. I can do that. Hey, you have to use Godzilla in your Harley Quinn story. Wait, what? Well, you know what? I know how to do that because I understand the emotional beats that I need to get across. Hey, you have to tell your story backwards. Well, you know what? I can do that because I know what emotional beats are necessary for the story to feel fulfilling, and I can actually do it in reverse. That's when you get a movie like Pulp Fiction, or you get a movie that like Memento, or a story that really cuts things up differently, a comic book that's unconventional in all kinds of ways. A lot of the time what happens is you read it and you realize it still hits these beats. It just does them in a different order. It cuts certain things out. Okay. And that's what I'm going to show you. So this is all part and parcel to your 8-page story. If you understand this stuff, you can hone in really quick and be like, the most powerful version of my 8-page story is actually going to be the intro. It's just going to be the character. Because all I want to show is how this character is longing for something out in the world and hasn't found it yet. And that's it. It's a character study. That's what I want to do. You could say, no, you know what I really want? I want to show this character venturing out for the first time because that's the most inspiring moment. And that's what my story is about. It's about the need to take chances and not knowing what's out there. Okay, well, then I'm going to use the end of Act 1. I'm going to do that moment in my story. Okay. And when you have 8 pages, that's all you get. So you can't do this whole thing. You don't have 120 pages. So you just get this moment and you have to kind of figure out how to isolate it, or this moment when all hope. So I'll give you the last few and then I'll stop. All hope is lost right before Act 3, the end of Act 2. Usually something terrible happens to your character where they feel like everything they've tried to achieve is collapsing and they have a lot of self-doubt. This is where, like, you know, Rapunzel in Tangled is back at home in her tower and thinks that Flynn Rider betrayed her. This is where the boat is going down and Kate Winslet's in the lifeboat and thinks that Jack stole the heart of the thing from her and betrayed her family and doesn't love her, and she's going back. This is where in Iron Man, he's lost everything and not what's the guy's name? What's the guy's name? I'm totally blanking. I forgot. So I saw it so long ago. The William Hurt character and not William Hurt. Anyway, I don't even look in the comments. You guys are all going to think I'm a fake nerd, fake geek for
Obadiah Stane.
Obadiah Stane. Yes. It has taken everything away from him and there's no hope and his heart is, you know, ripped out and all that kind of stuff, whatever, Iron Man, you know, that. And so it's that moment in all those movies that this is where, you know, it looks like they've lost to the Terminator, you know, there's no hope. And then it's right before they go into the printing press and all that stuff. When he gets up and they have no weapons left and that's it. He gets up out of the rubble and he's a machine and he's not hurt and they're screwed. That's that. Now, at that point, your hero usually will either just decide to get up and fight. You know, Moana is like, oh, I lost and Maui left me and there's no hope. And then she sees her grandma and her grandma tells her, actually, you know, remember who you are. And then she goes into Act 3. Act 3 spins into a place where your character is confronting in a dangerous way their biggest fear in the climax, the biggest sort of antagonist, the thing that represents all the sort of anxieties that the conflict has been driven by, and then either overcomes them or succumbs to them, whatever kind of story you're telling. That's where it all comes to a head. And then there's kind of a falling action here. Can you guys see me too, or just see the screen?
You can see both.
Okay, good. Because I'm like doing all this hand gesture. I'm like, do you see me even, or am I just like talking to avoid? This part here, this part is a fantastic thing if you can do it in your story on your 8-pager, because it brings everything to a head. It's a very dramatic way of doing a story. And this is a part where after everything has happened is kind of the quiet revelation sometimes of what it all means. Okay. So these are the points. What I'm trying to say is when you now know, like I did, well, I want to tell a story about a guy who's a photographer of Batman for years and years and years, and is at a point where he just wants to know, did anything he do mean anything? Okay. I start to say, you know where I want to be? I want to be here, where he's going to understand whether or not it does, because he's going to come face to face with Batman, who might tell him no, it doesn't mean anything, and all of that. Or he might go up there and never get an answer. That's terrifying too. So this is the part that I want. To do this, I need to imply a lot of this. Doesn't mean I have to do everything, but it means I have to I'll give you as much as I can to support this moment. Whatever is going to fill that moment emotionally out the most, I'll do. So now let's go look at the story and I'll show you what I was thinking. And then we're going to look at one that I wrote as though it's work that came into the workshop. I'm not going to give you my intentions. I'm not going to tell you what I did to get it across, the finish line or what I was thinking or any of that. I'm going to approach it as though I just read it and it's by somebody else. And I'll show you how we're going to approach your work in class that way. Okay. Does anyone, by the way, I'll stop for a second. Usually I'll stop for more questions, but I'm excited. And I also want to make sure everybody is getting the full money's worth of everything here. And you really feel like we're covering a lot of ground. So Ty, is there anyone? I don't have questions open on my screen, so you're going to have to tell me.
One quick one. Gray Austin asks, when you say 8-page story, just for clarification, are you meaning an 8-page story that tells a complete story?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. That's really up to you. The question was, is it an 8-page story that tells the whole story? For me, an 8-page story that can't stand on its own is ineffective. It doesn't mean that it has to tell the entire arc of a thing, but if you can't pick it up as someone who does not read that character or does not read that, series in some way and read it and be like, that moved me, then it's a failure. If it depends on everything outside of itself, then to me, it's not effective. So does it mean it needs a beginning, middle, and an end? No, for me, again, I think a lot of the time you don't have room to do 3-act structure in an 8-pager. The reason I gave you the Human Torch thing that's about 20 pages, that's my first published comic, actually. Even though I don't know if it was the first written one, it was the first published one, but that actually fits as much as I could fit of a full 3-act structure in a 20-page thing. And I think it came out okay. I have criticisms, but I'm really proud of the art that Scott Wegner, who's an incredible guy, does Atomic Robo, did, and I think it came out better than I had hoped. So rereading it, I was very happy with it. But the idea is, in 20 pages, you can kind of approximate a loose version of this. I'll give you one that you can see that it's a pared down one for short stories that you can kind of fit if you have 20 pages, maybe. But ultimately, what you're going to wind up with at 8 pages is something that's like a 1-act play. Or a 1-scene exercise. Do you know what I mean? And those can be incredibly telling and be a full thing. But the key isn't to be what's the beginning, backstory, middle, end, what's the turning point. The key is to have something that feels like an arc that's emotionally resonant, that feels like the character goes through something that you as a reader feel and come out the other side feeling changed in some way. It's a full scene. It's something that if you were watching it acted out, you could walk away and feel satisfied because it transported you to an experience through this character or characters that essentially means something. You walk away from feeling, changed, feeling moved, feeling made to think in some way, all of it. Does that answer your question? Does that make sense? Okay. Anything else? You want one more quick one, then we'll dive in?
Yeah. So what is the relation between plot and story when we talk about all of this?
Well, the relation to plot and story, that's a big question. So I'm going to do it really quick. The plot is essentially the mechanics of what is happening to your character. And usually what it is plot is the forces working against your character in a lot of ways, right? Plot to me, when I think of it, is this is where Joker attacks. This is where this character comes in and provides information. This is where the character, you're doing a fight scene because, you need action in this issue. Those things For me, I think of plot as an elastic thing that I can use to heighten the emotion of the story wherever possible. This skeleton is all emotional, except for that one inciting incident. All of it is, this is where my character makes decisions. And like I said, the whole thing could happen in the post-apocalyptic future. The whole thing could happen before the Terminator arrives, depending on what kind of story you want to tell. If you said, what's going to be more emotionally effective, to have Sarah Connor not know who she is until the last moment, and then the apocalypse happens, and then half the movie takes place on the other side. If you believe that as the writer, you go there, you do it. That means adjusting the plot to fit the most impactful emotional version of your story possible. If you feel like, Titanic, to me, it's too bombastic. I think that it would be more powerful if it wasn't when the boat was sinking and they get off the boat before it sinks, and that's part of the thing. Go for it. You know what I mean? If it's about, hey, they escape together, and it's emotionally about the disaster that happens when you don't take control of your own life, whatever it is, like, you do that. So what I'm trying to say is plot, the events of the story that aren't emotional decisions your character is making, but it's the context of the story, it's the events happening to your character, it's the obstacles. Those are things that you adjust to create the most effective and resonant emotional beats in this timeline possible. We can talk a lot more about that as we get into more and more stories. But again, if you're just signing on, there's a lot about it in 3-act structure. There's a lot about it in emotional conflict versus plot conflict, which was a really fun class we did towards the end of 101. So you can go check it out. It's all archived for you there. All right, so let's look at 1,000 words really quick. Let me pull it up. Here we go. Oh, that's the Human Torch. Testament. It's the last one. Sorry, 1,000 words. There we go. Okay. All right. So what I did was I'm isolating the climax of the story. Okay. But what it does is it starts out and it's him telling you, it's the Shutter Bat. It's the character who's been a photographer of Batman for many, many years, telling you, out of all the black and whites I took of him, this is my favorite. It starts with this picture that's hopeful. This one, the real one is long gone, sold for 7 figures at an auction to some rich family, right? This is just a print. It's not the most famous one I took. That was the first one. And the first one he describes as the cover of Detective Comics 27. But he goes, there I am, I'm young, and look at that. That's me just to the right of the signal. This is me tonight. And this is him old and sick. And he's holding a copy of the picture, essentially. I didn't last long in forensics. A year in, and there was a Joker attack on a kid's hospital, and that was all she wrote for me. But Jim Gordon keeps him around and makes him the official photographer of Batman because he likes him. So they call him the Shutter Bat, and that became my thing, he says, taking pictures of Batman. So here, okay, this is where he says, I may have taken more pictures of them than anyone. I'm not sure. But if you read the Gotham papers, you've seen my work. And so he talks about how he's given his work to various papers. He used to only go to the one that was objective, but then he had kids and he got married and had kids. And so eventually he starts giving them to any paper, and the papers have different political bents. Some of them hate Batman. Some of them love Batman. And so they color the work differently. You see, and this gives John and I don't remember if it was Danny that inked this, but essentially John and the inker a chance to really have fun changing the image, making it dark, making it bulky, making it fine, and making it more hopeful of Batman. Klaus. Oh my God. Sorry, Klaus. I love you. Klaus is a dear friend. Sorry. Anyway, so he talks about that. So how over the time he kind of compromised and he gave the pictures to everyone, right? Over the years, we had together, Hazel bought back a bunch of my negatives. That's his wife who passed away. And during the past weeks, I've been looking at my life's work and reconsidering. I thought they were objective, but now they all seem charged with mixed meanings. I can't see them clearly, free of how they were presented. Admiration, accusation, I can't tell what they mean anymore of what any of it means. This is what I said to you about the way I was feeling about my run at that point, or our run at that point, or my whole time on Batman. So this is me communicating to you. Did any of it mean anything, right? A month ago, I started falling down in the middle of the day. It turned out to be what you'd think. Maybe it was the chlorochromate from the photographs. Maybe it was the smoking. Either way, Hazel has gone 3 years and Junior is 2 oceans away. I tried to be a good husband, a good father, but these moments, colored differently by time, how do they add up? What do I look like, really? That's the only line I'm like, did I go a little too on the nose? But anyway, they're doing a retrospective of my work, the Shutter Bat, before I kick it. which is why I came back here tonight to find out, to ask him, which ones are you? How do you see yourself? You, who I've taken thousands of pictures of, what would your choice be? There's a fireworks display going off to honor the city's tercentenary. So what is that, 300 years? So I don't feel bad about pulling Batman away for a moment. But see, I screwed up. The exertion of the climbing, the steps, the light, the heat, and I fell, right? The camera went off as I did. And so he takes pictures as he's falling of Batman saving him. As he caught me, I tried to ask, how do you see it all? Your life, your work. If you had to sum it up in one image, what would it be? But I never got the words out. The next morning he wakes up and look, this is when I saw it. My picture, the original, he got it from the Waynes. So it was Bruce Wayne that bought it. I don't know, but there was a certificate with it of ownership given to me. I like to think that this was his answer, not just for him, but for me. Because despite it all, even after all these years, all the horrors and disappointments, the mistakes, that's the picture. It has to be for him, but for me too, and for all of us. Standing there at our most hopeful, trying something bold together, every night a chance to see it all anew. And that's it. So let me show you. So what this is, when you boil the story down, okay, is this. But he's telling you this. The inciting incident, he finds out he has cancer, okay? He decides here he's going to essentially look at all of his work and decide what it means. Okay. He's going to he talks about how Hazel and them bought all the stuff back, and he looked at it and he can't decide. So this is where he decides he's going to do the plan, right? The point of no return, because he's making that decision. Right. And then he makes the plan. And as he gets up there, he's up there and he starts to fall down and realizes, no, he can't, he's not going to do it. Everything is gone. Right. There's no worlds in which he's going to be able to get the answer to the question he wants. And he falls. And as he falls, Batman saves him. And then here in this, you get the epiphany. But this is where we are. This is the point of the story, is here. And the reason I chose this area for it was because ultimately it's the moment of great revelation for a character. It's the moment when they get an answer, if they're going to get one, about the meaning of the story. You can do it right after the all hope is lost. Some stories like that, they wind up being empowered in that moment. And the climax in the third act is just action. They've decided and they know who they are and that, and it's more a matter of sort of an affirmation of that. But generally that area, that end of act 2 to the end of act 3, is where you're really going to get your most powerful sort of emotional revelations. Okay. So for me, that worked here. So if you see what I'm saying, the story is extremely, for, all the stuff wrong with it, I'm sure there's super flawed and, could be better in all kinds of ways. I'm never one to be like, oh, it was so great. But it's on message. You know what I mean? The whole time. Here, let me stop sharing. It's about what it's supposed to be about. And I knew, because I understand kind of foundational story structure, how to isolate the point that I thought would be most effective to tell in just 8 pages, and how to kind of touch on the other beats so that you understood that they had happened and you got reference to them, so that they would power this emotional moment, because you get the long road he took to get here, and that this is the culmination of all of that. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Okay, cool. All right. So that's the example where I think it's sort of working relatively well, even though, again, I'm sure there's a lot that could work better. Now I'm going to show you a story that I did that I think could use some improvement. And in that way, I'm going to, here, let me go back. Here we go. Okay. This was one of my first Marvel stories. And just so you know, I still get a check from them for 10 cents, I think, for this, this and Iron Man Noir or whatever it is. And it's really funny to get it. And Ty was telling me there's a bar out in LA that if you bring in a residuals check that's under 50 cents, they give you a free beer. So I'm owed one, but I'm very proud when I get a little Marvel check now and then. All right. So let me talk about the assignment here. Or you know what? I'm going to do it like this. I'm not going to talk about anything. We're going to read it. I'm going to show you the story. I'm going to and approach it the way I would approach your work. Okay. Not my work. So I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but in case you didn't get a chance to look at it, essentially it begins with Colossus saying, there's an old Russian saying, the nest is the eggs, not the sticks. It means that home isn't a place, it's family. It means home is the people you care about and the history you share with them. So he's making something here. We don't see what it is. And then Kurt shows up and sees it and says, very impressive, right? And he encourages him to come for a walk with him, but he says, no, he doesn't want to do it. And he asks Kurt for another canister of the stuff that he's using to make whatever it is he's making. Kurt disappears. And he's looking out the window here and he's thinking about how, it doesn't feel like home. It feels like it's full of strangers. And then he hears someone or senses someone behind him and he says, who's there? And it's Ileana, magic. And at this point, Ileana and him are not getting along. I don't remember why in continuity. I honestly can't cast my mind back that far. But here he's like, Ileana, forgive me. I thought he's happy to see her, but she's cold to him. She tells him she needs his help with something. So then she brings him outside where you see Cannonball and Sunspot and the rest of the New Mutants. And the story is essentially taking place on an asteroid that's being made into a mutant refuge. And this was all a big part of X-Men continuity at this time. It was called Utopia. And it was Magneto's old base, and it was dragged up from the ocean, I think. And it was made into this base that was going to be a salvation, kind of a protected area for all mutants. And so they're trying to retrofit it. And so they bring him out here and they say, the soil is too hard. We need your help. And he's like, oh, to pulverize it? And they say, no, to drive this tractor because we don't know how to do it. And so he drives the tractor. And as he's doing it and helping them with the land, he reminisces about the days that him and Ileana, here's the image, used to ride the tractors. He used to, drive the tractor, and she used to come with him back in Russia. And how that's how she got her name. Snowflake was that it was the particles from the wheat and the grain that would be in the air. And then she brings him back because she doesn't want to hear about it anymore. And she's like, listen, all you do anymore is remember, you've got to move on. You've got to forget. Like everything that you're thinking about is dead. And you need to be able to look forward. And he says, that's not true. And then she shows you what he's been making. And it's a memorial to all the X-Men that fell in the event before. And she says, you need to learn to forget. Take care, Peter. And she leaves and he says goodbye. And then Kurt shows up and Kurt asks him, again, he gives him the canisters, and Peter says, actually, I'm ready for the walk. So it's like, maybe Ileana was right. Maybe he needs to get out. And he says, again, there's an old saying, it's the eggs, not the sticks. And maybe that means it's about looking forward instead of looking back. And then you see one of the names is Kitty Pryde. Okay, so that's the story in a nutshell. Let me now sort of move away from it for a second to talk to you about what I don't think is. Okay, so for criteria, right? What's the story about? If this was your story, what I'd say to you in the workshop is, I think from reading it, I think what it's about is a moment in Peter's life where he is struggling with the idea of moving past history and moving past recent events that have been pretty devastating and contained a lot of loss for him, to be able to make a new home in this place and sort of evolve into the Colossus he needs to be to move forward. And I think that's kind of what it feels like you were going for, Scott. And then I would say, and just so you understand, when we're doing this with your work, I always, even in person and all that stuff, we never have the person respond until the critique is over. And then the person can say anything they want and engage and say, listen, I didn't mean that, or I wanted this, thank you. And this is what I thought, and all that stuff, whatever it is. But for the period, I think it's good to just listen to what people's reactions are. So I would have to shut up if I was listening and just, if it was my work and whatever. So that's what I would say to Scott, I think the work's about. And then I would say, here's some things I think are working really well in that regard. I really enjoy sort of the framing device with Kurt. I think that the idea of having him go out for a walk seems to speak to that notion that he seems caught inside with his memories. And I like the interaction, the way that Ileana kind of tricks him into coming with her, even though he thinks it's to talk to her, but instead it's a task. It shows the coldness between them. I'd say that I think the story he tells, it's a little sappy, but at the same time, It's a nice way of showing that he's fixated on the past. And then ultimately, when she brings him back and they have the argument and we reveal what it is that he was working on, I think there's power in that. So I think there are things that are working well. What I'd say is now third, what is not working well for me? What's not working well for me when I read the story is that it feels like, actually, when I really take a close look at it, it feels like two stories grafted together. It feels like one is sort of about Peter mourning the dead and not being able to make a new home in this place because he can't accept it as a fertile sort of possibility for the future. And the other story is about whatever happened between him and Ileana on a personal level in the past events, and their sort of inability to connect anymore. And those two things don't feel quite click together. They feel almost there, like close enough that you can almost get away with it, but they don't actually link up perfectly. So that something like the Kitty Pryde revelation at the very end almost throws the story off, feels like it's kind of an odd hook where you're like, wait, what? And then it's like, oh, I get it. You know, he's mourning Kitty Pryde and everybody that died, but at the same time, that didn't feel like what it was about. Similarly, it also feels like there's a lot. There's Kurt, there's Ileana, there's the trip to the field to plow. Then there's back with Ileana and back with Kurt. It's a lot of movement for 8 pages to be able to communicate something. And it feels like some stuff is starting to get lost. Also, I just think that that's enough. That's enough for now. That's what I'd say the biggest complaints I have are, above all, I think that ultimately it feels almost like two stories grafted together. One about his inability to make this his home because of his attachment to the past, and the other about whatever is happening between him and Ileana in the present being something that's indicative of bigger conflicts between them. That he, like, for example, that he can't allow her to become the person that she's becoming as Magic, someone grown up, someone more independent, more violent, with darker tendencies, all of that stuff. So that story feels different, and they feel like they're bumping up against each other. Do you guys sort of agree or no? Let me just see what you think. What are they saying, Ty? You can see.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. See, so that's the thing. It doesn't mean the story is terrible. It doesn't mean, and again, I'm never going to read your stuff in class if I think that, I'm not reading it to criticize it or show what's wrong with it. That's not the point. I'm reading it because I think it's close and it has a lot of good qualities. But there's something that we could work on constructively in class that would be an illustrative lesson for people to see how, if their work kind of has a similar problem, how to think about and how to improve on. Okay. So now the fourth part, right? So the most important thing I think about approaching someone's work, how do you improve it? Okay. So if you agree, Scott, the writer, you might not, Scott, you might hate me for saying it. You might, you can't really do that. You got to chill out and be like, just, all of it is for the right reasons. But I mean, I'm like arguing as though I hate myself for this. But the point is, you might disagree, and that's fine. You can also get really valid criticism in class and say, I don't agree, and I'm just keeping it the way it is. I've been there many times as the critic, and I've been there occasionally as the person that really believes strongly that I've gotten where I want it to be and not take the criticism. And that's totally okay. There's no offense one way or another at all. Workshop is all of this. It's just constructive. That's it. So you should feel, and this is something I should have hit on earlier, but you need to feel safe in workshop to be able to submit work that matters. It's good. And safe doesn't mean everyone's going to praise it at all. Safe doesn't mean everyone's going to coddle you. It just means they're on your side. They're here to help you make the story the best it can be on the terms that you've provided, not to bash it as, I don't like this. This is stupid. This isn't what I like. This isn't why you're not at all. It's, here's what I think you're doing. This is what I think is working really well in that regard. This is the things that I think, these are things I think are not maybe working as well. And here's how you fix it. So here's how I would approach this story, Scott. I would say, I think you actually might be better off separating out those two and picking which thing you want to address. So if you want to do a story, and my inclination is that you probably are a little bit more interested in him making this his home and the incident with the New Mutants and that. And I think one thing you could consider, because the story is actually also kind of packed visually. If you look at it, doesn't have a lot of big room for Colossus, a big character, to kind of, shine and flex. It's pretty cut up into smaller panels. One consideration is to remove the Ileana aspect altogether. To actually have him alone, have Kurt show up and say to him, do you want to go for a walk? And he doesn't, and he's working on something we don't see in that way. And then Kurt leaves him alone. And outside, the kids call to him and say, can you help us with something? And he goes out. And a similar scene, he goes out and he helps them either pulverize the soil to make it fertile, or the tractor in that way. He instead of using an old tractor, it feels like something where it should be, maybe pulverizing the soil, doing something that isn't kind of a callback to all the stuff he used to do, because you don't want him to be nostalgic. You want him to do something that actually helps. And he can tell the kind of story he's telling here. But the story that he tells here should in some way reflect, even despite himself, the kind of hints that he actually realizes that back in the old country, they had to do this stuff to make something habitable. And it wasn't easy and it was tough. And it hits him after he says it, that he's kind of telling himself what he needs to do. Then he goes back up after they thank him. Kurt's there. Do you want to go for a walk? Yeah, I think I'm ready to go. And we see what he was working on. And as they leave, you could do a final twist, actually, if you want, where Kurt could say to the kids, or look out of the corner of his eye and be like, he actually set that all up because he knew that it would help Colossus get over himself. And the whole thing was just Kurt trying to help his friend. And in that way, if you did something like that, and I'm just kind of, doing it, making it up and, playing around with it as we're talking, that would be something that would really get a chance to explore their relationship closely, give a bit more meat to that, be maybe a deeper and more, I think, penetrating character study of Colossus at a point in his life that is more universal. It's about, having to accept that sometimes the home that we knew is gone and you have to make a new one. And it would also speak to the idea of the people. It would speak to that idea of the eggs, which doesn't quite line up with the Ileana stuff. It doesn't quite match, because what he's saying is it's not the sticks, it's the eggs, it's the people. And yet at the same time, he's not connecting with her. So it doesn't quite match. Whereas here it would, because it would be about, he remembers it's the people. And that was what made, making the soil fertile in the old country worth it, was the help from everybody, whatever, that kind of thing. It was, you could do that. Another option, if you really want to do the Ileana story, is one of two things. I think that you could do the Ileana story. The better way to approach it is to do the kind of story we just did, that's more universal, that shows them either connecting, shows them connecting slightly, and coming at each other from places that are more relatable beyond the plot that just happened in X-Men. One of my problems reading this is that I didn't say out loud, Scott didn't say out loud in the story what happened. So reading it now, and even me reading it now, 10 years later, I have no recollection of what the problem was between them. And that makes for an ineffective story ultimately, because I don't even know what happened. I don't know what they're arguing over. But there's a way to do it more universally, where he's up there and she comes up and we take Kurt out. And in that way, she comes up and wants him to do something down there. And she takes him down there to help get rid of wreckage of old machinery, whatever it is. And they're throwing it out because he's strong. And he's doing it, and he's talking to her about Snowflake and the past. And she eventually says, you know what? I didn't need your help. Like I called you down here because I wanted you to get out of that room and like see that you have to make a change and like move on. And he's like, I don't want to. And she's like, well, I care about you. And this is how you do it. Like, and if you don't want to, I don't know how to help you, but like, I didn't need it. See? And she shows him she could do it, what he could do in that way. And she's like, I'll be here whenever you're ready. And he goes, he's either goes back up or he doesn't go back up, and he goes with her. But whatever it is, there's a way of making it, a way of making it really poignant between them. If you can make the reader understand what they're going through in a way that's relatable. Right now, it's not. It depends on the plot that happened off screen in a way that I can't access it. The other way to do it, if you really want to address whatever it is that happened in continuity, third way is to address it. Like you could be about whatever just happened in X-Men and Nation X and all of that stuff. And they could hash it out. And that can be a really powerful scene. If you can make that conflict something that isn't just about the specific plot points of that Ileana Peter fight, meaning if it's whatever it is that, like, for example, I don't remember what it was, but let's just say, for example, he saw her act like magic and be way darker than Ileana used to be, and it upset him and he doesn't want her to become that. Them fighting over that gives something universal that parents and children can relate to. You can say, I don't want you to grow up. I don't want you to become somebody I don't recognize sometimes. I go through that all the time, like, my teenager, and I relate to that. And then that sense of your kid saying, this is who I am, growing into someone, and you got to embrace that. You got to accept that. That argument, even if it's contextualized in the plot points of that Nation X stuff, can really still work really well as a unit, but right now it's not. So that's how I would approach it. Do you see what I'm saying? So the idea is that's the format I'm going to use more elaborately when we look at your work. We'll spend the majority of a class, a good 40 minutes or so. We'll look at a piece that, or we can look at your piece and then look at a piece that sort of has an effective approach to the things that are maybe misfiring a little bit in your piece, but it will be sort of split that way. So that was a very truncated version of it. What I would do is look at the panels, look at the pages, and show bit by bit where I think you could readjust, where you could, but that's the general format. So what I really hope is that you guys can see, the approach that we're going to take, and that it's exciting to you. That's kind of how I feel like we're going to learn a lot faster and a lot better, in class. So let me open it up to questions now, because I want to make sure if there's anything we're not covering, anything that that I'm not hitting on, or that you have questions about because I went too fast or I wasn't clear, just let me know. So Ty, let me know what.
There's actually a good question from EDA who asked, you made a comment about Peter's story being cheesy or sappy. How do you avoid sounding cheesy or sappy?
I kind of don't. Like, I just go for it. I like cheesy and sappy. But the place that I know it sounds weird, but the place that I really can tell when something's cheesy and sappy, I realize, is when I see it against the art. So I think it's okay to allow yourself to be as sentimental as you want in the script, because what happens when you're making comics is that you'll write a script and then the art comes in and then they'll combine your script. You can either do a pass. My favorite stage is honestly when I'm doing a pass over the script, when the art has just come in and I'm adjusting the script to fit the art better, because that's a moment when you can really assess whether the visuals have done your work in a way that makes your dialogue duplicative and redundant and sappy, or if it needs it. It needs extra. Sometimes it needs more than you did and more sappiness because the art is more static or more stark, and so sappiness works as a contrast in a good way. So I would say allow yourself to just kind of go for it in the script and then see how it matches up with the art, and then have someone else read it too, someone you trust. But I have a lot easier time deciding whether or not my cheesy, sappy, meter is off the charts when I see it actually placed over the visual storytelling itself. So you have other chances like that. It's not like you write the script and it goes away and you never see it again. You write the script, the art comes in, then they apply it as a lettering script, which you can, again, adjust before they do that. But then you usually get a pass at the lettering script as well. So you'll get a couple chances to really look at it and say, is this too corny, or is the art doing work that makes this, unneeded?
And then I have one from Trevor Fernandez Lankowitz, who asked, I'd love to know if or how your strategy changes for short stories involving characters without decades of established history.
Yeah, I mean, I do short stories, I do them all the time for myself. Like, with my indie stuff, I've done a lot of 8-page stuff for Witches and for American Vampire. I did them all the time for anthology stuff. And it doesn't really change. I think it doesn't really change, honestly. I mean, I really believe deeply in, the 8-page form is hard because you only have time for one moment. And if you don't accept that that moment can't depend on decades of history or even a familiarity with the character beyond the most basic, then you're not going to tell a story that is timeless. If your story depends on people knowing that character very well, then it's believe me, like the more you lean away from that, the better. It doesn't mean you can't do something tricky where you're putting in all kinds of Easter eggs and things that show for people that do know the character how deep your knowledge is and how the history is really there and ever present. But if you aren't going to have a good time reading it if you don't know that stuff, then even on Batman or any licensed character, you're in trouble. You don't want to do that. You want it to be something. I mean, I know everyone knows this quote, but the idea that every comic is someone's first. I know it's hokey, but it really is true. I mean, someone will pick up that Nation X thing and read it and be like, I don't know what happened between Ileana and Peter or whoever these are. That wasn't interesting. Whereas they hopefully, if you don't know Batman well, you can still pick up the Shutter Bat story or the Joker story, which I've provided to you too, which I'm proud of as a kind of same kind of thing, a button on my whole Joker thinking that you can read without knowing that character very well, and hopefully it says something to you about both the character, the main character, the licensed character like Batman or Joker, and about human nature in some way. So yeah, the Joker one, you have access to all this stuff too. Like the Human Torch one is an example of pretty much a 3-act structure. Usually what you cut out in short stories, you cut out the point of no return, like the middle. The middle is where you kind of fudge it when you're doing a 20-page 3-act structure thing. You usually have an inciting incident and then rising action where they go out against something and something happens that devastates them, and then they get back up and go up back against it. So it's almost like you're skipping a lot of Act 2 in it. But I included the Human Torch to show you something that was the shortest version of kind of a full arc that I could give you. The Joker story is another example of one that picks a moment that is the climax of the story. I sort of isolated in that way, so you can take a look at it. The other thing to know is that when I chose this, because again, I didn't go into how I built the Nation X story, but this is a story that happens in the falling action. It's a story that happens after everything. So it's meant to be kind of that final kind of acceptance of the lesson you're supposed to learn by the climax, or something that you can sometimes learn in the final moments of a narrative, if the character is reluctant to take that lesson in. So this hits there. That's why I did it over at this point, because I wanted it to feel that way. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, that does that answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. What else? A couple more.
Okay. How do you avoid keeping the story from getting boring? If you're writing a short story, is that just are you going to cover it, or actively things you're doing to make sure it's staying engaging with the reader?
How do you mean? Like if you're doing a short story, how does it not be boring?
Yeah, how do you keep your writing from seeming a little bit stagnant, or is that just way too general a question?
You're gonna get accused of it all the time. I mean, you have to be able to keep it from being stagnant to you. That's all that matters. Like I don't know. I mean, like for me, there would have been more money and more whatever in staying on Batman a lot longer, and DC after Metal, just if you make the decision to do this, and look, I'm not one to knock. I've worked a lot of bad jobs in my life before I really made it in comics. And by the way, like we have a whole business class that we did for 101 that's all about like page rates and what you make and all that stuff. And I'm lucky now, I've done enough good, not good, but I've done enough work that's sales heavy at DC and other places to have royalties coming in quarterly. So I have like I have like an income based on the work I've already done that is not huge, but is like a sustainable kind of income over time. So there are ways of creating a sustainable lifestyle for yourself that over time in comics that is a lot more reliable than you think, especially now that streaming is so eager for all kinds of stories of independent comics, and you can option more stuff and all of that. But the point I'm trying to make is that uh, I know what it's like, when you feel like you have to take a job for money in comics, or you take something that you're like, this is safe for me. What would be safe is if I stayed on Batman another year, even though my ideas aren't as good, but it's fine. I can do fine. It'll be fine. When you start doing that, if I know that sometimes you have to, and like you need the money, and I get it, I've been there, but I'm telling you, the worst feeling in the world is when you're doing your job that you've always wanted, like working. And this happened to me in fiction, not in comics. I've been very lucky in comics. Like from the moment I started, I was given opportunities that I thought I was going to totally fuck up and get fired. But I was given a lot of chances early, and luckily they worked out. But in books, I had a few incidents where I was working on things under contract that I really didn't. I was just doing it because I desperately needed them to accept it and make the money. And I really didn't like what I was writing at certain points. And that feeling of like working on something that you're just trying to get through, to be like, I know that I'm doing this one for the money, but the next one I'm going to do it so that believe me, like it just, you get diminishing. If you can avoid it, because the diminishing return, get a job somewhere else, because the writing job of doing bad work that you don't like, fans read it. It hurts your credibility with them. It's a terrible feeling. It just feels like shit. Like your stomach turns. It's like a viscerally bad feeling. And so the key for me ever since that has been, even if it's a dumb decision financially, if I can take the risk or afford it, to try and do the thing that's going to be exciting to me creatively, that like, and I'm telling you, like, I know it sounds idealistic. I know it sounds privileged, all of it. And it can be, entirely. I'm in a very lucky position right now. But I'm telling you that even when it wasn't so easy, remembering what that was like before I broke into comics was a big compass for me, to be like, I don't want to do that in comics. I don't want to take a job. I'd rather go back to, tutoring and teaching and whatever I could do than sit and be working on characters I've always wanted to work on, but doing stories I don't like. So that's a proxy to what you were asking. But the point is, like, that's why absolutely one of the twin golden rules of the class is always be the most exciting writer to you that you can be. It's crazy important. It's crazy important. Take the risks. Like, fans, the biggest thing you have is your fan base. I'm telling you, like, and that doesn't mean you cater to them. Your real fans are going to love you for being you, like doing the things that you like. Like, I know I'm not Grant Morrison. You know what I mean? I'm not, Neil Gaiman. I'm not James Tynion. We all have different things. I'm not Donnie. Like, you all have your different things. And for me, I like what, I have my own Spielbergian, over the top, big stuff, sentimental. So I love that stuff. That's who I am. But I'm always trying to push myself to do things that make me creatively challenged and uncomfortable in that zone. And my friends make me do that too. Those same people. James is always on me about it. I'm on him all the time about it, that feeling. So what I'm trying to say, and then I'll stop. I know this is the longest answer in the world, but basically is, surround yourself with people that are going to encourage you to do the thing that you should do for yourself, which is be the most exciting writer to yourself, because your fans will follow you. Like, when you're Ram V, or you're doing something that's clearly out of integrity that you want to do and that you care about, and that you're putting your heart on the page that way in some way, fans follow you. And when they follow you, that's when you can resist those shitty jobs, because they'll always show up. I used to have these terrible conversations with James Tynion when I was broke and working in comics when I was just starting out. And I remember, as Court of Owls was beginning, not even when we were on Black Mirror, just asking him and being like, do you think I've built up enough fans that I can say no to this editorial note because we have enough clout? And it was just like, no. But then you'd say no anyway, because it was like, then fire me, because at that point I thought I'd get fired anyway, but I was rather get fired than compromise the story. And that was always it. It was always, do you have a big enough fan base now to really push back at the highest levels? And that's what it is, when your fans line up and say, we believe in you in some way, it gives you all the power to be able to make good decisions about story, about your career. So that, and it all comes from a place of sincerity. I swear to you, I can't give you better advice than that. And I know it sounds hokey, but it's the truth. Write the stuff that you would love to read. Be exciting to yourself. If you do that, fans will come, and having fans on your side means you can find work. You can do work. Doesn't mean you always make any money, but I'm just saying you will have a career that you're proud of. When you start, I've had so many people, I could tell you, I'm not going to throw people under the bus, but I had friends that were like, no. The key is having editors like you. The key is doing what they want you to do for those first 2 years so that they always choose you for gigs. And it's totally not true, because you do things they want to do, and often the ideas aren't the best because they're handed down from somebody above as an initiative. And then you do that thing and they're happy with you because you did it on time and you get a paycheck for it. But fans read it and say, this isn't any good. And then the sales aren't good. And then next time they don't choose you, or they choose you until they don't, in that way. And I could name 15 or 20 people I know that had that attitude and, wound up really hurting their careers or out of comics altogether because they mistook the idea of, being likable internally, not being an asshole as the opposite, but being someone that would do anything they asked on the page so that you get more work, mistaking that for power, as a writer with editorial and leverage to be able to say, look, I respect your opinion, but I can't do that. I'd rather not do that story for that reason. I can't, it's not me,
I actually have a question about screenplay formatting. So Pat Garcia says, hey, Scott, new student. I studied traditional screenplays in college, but I don't know how to write a script in comic format. Will we go over that in this course, or is there any online resources that you can recommend?
Oh, yeah, totally. We can put some online resources here in this. But one of the funny things is, like, I know, screenplay, people use different formats generally. Mostly if you're interested in screenplay, most people use final drafts, but there's also like fade in and all kinds of stuff. For scripting in comics, I've seen people use Final Draft, but most people just use Word, because part of it is that, well, we'll go over, and there's a class about this if you want to go look it up, but Marvel style versus full script, you wind up writing very differently for different artists. That's my advice to you too, is when I started, Greg hated my guts, Greg Capullo, and we always fought all the time because I could only write full script. I would only write these long, extensive full script things. Full script is like very much like a screenplay, but done in Word, where it's kind of like page 1, panel 1, close up on the wheels of a car, bloody as they race past the panel 2. We pull back and see it's, like a director's screenplay almost. Marvel style is very different. Marvel style is the outline. So it'd be like, this whole first scene is a car covered in blood racing down the streets. And what you communicate to the artist is the feeling, the tone, what you're trying to get across to the reader, the point of it. That's the goal. And you do that in full script too. You say this scene is about this, but I mean, it's much looser in Marvel style. And so the reason I think most people use Word is because the more you write comics, the more ultimately what you want to try and do, if you can. I know some writers that are my friends that cannot. I really can only write in one format. But the more formats you can write in, the more artists you can work with. Because like Greg Capullo loves the most minimal scripts possible because he likes the challenge of doing the visual storytelling. Other people like Jim Chung loved full script, wanted that. And they changed stuff. They always could change stuff and whatever they wanted, but they wanted the real detailed panel 1, panel 2. So using Word gives you the ability to be flexible that way. It's just kind of you can kind of mess around one way or another. And again, I'd always talk to your artist first. Communicate, even if they don't want you to, communicate with your artist and say, how do you like to work? What's your preference? And do your best to meet them in the middle as much as you can, because you'll get the best work out of it. Once you allow them to shine, you'll see what you get back is 10 times better than what you are dictating to them if they're uncomfortable with it. All right. Any other quick rapid fire things? What do you think?
While telling your story, how do you decide on the best camera or panel angles? Is it a cinematic take, the best way to capture beat of a panel, or is that just more of an artist interpretation?
It's definitely really up to the artist, and you don't want to overwhelm them with those. If you have a really important panel, it's similar to screenplay. Screenplay, if you write it, you're kind of guiding a little bit by saying things like, instead of saying close up on, which you don't normally say, you kind of say, the boots squish in the mud. That implies a close up, but it's not saying close up. And it's similar in comics. Like, you don't want to really dictate that too much. You want to give the artist a little bit, but what you could say is like, panel 2, his boots squish in the mud. That implies a close up, in that way. But what I'd say is, again, like, just try and talk to your artist beforehand. They might say, I really don't like that kind of stuff. And dictating it, and say, okay, well, what if we just talk through the scene first on the phone? Is that cool if we talk through it? They might say, great. And then let them contribute ideas and go back and forth. So I have different ways of working with each artist. Everything is up to the way they want to proceed. And then I see it as one of the great things about comics is it always keeps you adaptable and learning new things to work with people in new ways. Like, some people literally like to work over the phone. Like, Raphael and I have a shorthand now, that Albuquerque from American Vampire, we go back and forth. Other people I have like really loose script. Other people I talk, Tony on Noctera, we talk the whole issue first, go over it. He throws ideas at me. I throw ideas at him. Then I write up an outline, show it. Then like, everybody's different. So the better you can kind of adapt to your co-creator or collaborator, the better off you'll be. What else? Is this good for you guys too? You guys like want to make sure like you guys are really, I want to make sure this class is something that just elevates from the last semester and you feel good about it. And, you guys are going to submit stuff and we're going to have a blast. And I love doing this. So I can do it till, I was going to say an old man, but I'm old. So oldest.
By the way.
Awesome.
And I actually have a good one here. In the examples you used today, how much communication did you have with the artists?
I mean, on the Nation X one, I had a little bit. I was brand new, so I didn't know to do these things. So that was a big problem when I started. I didn't understand the collaborative process coming from fiction where you do everything all by yourself. It took me a while, and I wanted badly to be collaborative. I just didn't understand you could get on the phone and call or email and be like, what do you want to do? I wasn't kind of guided that way with it, and it's nobody's fault. It was mine for not realizing that was the right thing to do. So I didn't have a ton of back and forth with the artist on Nation X. On the Human Torch, I actually did, because Scott Wegner like taught me all this stuff, because it was the first time I ever wrote a script, and he was very much like, you can't do 16 panels. Like, let me handle this with you and go back. He was super, super generous, Weirdly enough, I just found out from Tyler, the woman that colored that, Rhonda, colored my very first issue, colored Wildfires also for us now. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize it was the same person. But yeah, right. What else? Well, yeah. Was there anything else I didn't cover there that I was going to say? Did I answer that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question actually. It's pretty cool for people that are going to be submitting. When starting out, do you recommend diving into one style like horror, romance, sci-fi, and try to perfect it, or try as much variety as possible to show you can?
I mean, that's hard. I mean, I think it really is just what speaks to you the most. Like, you're not really creating a portfolio. What editors respond to, and again, we have a class with an editor, with Will Dennis, who ran Vertigo for a number of years and was responsible for 100 Bullets and Why the Last Man and American Vampire and all this stuff. And he speaks a lot to the idea of what he looks for in a pitch and what he looks for in a writer's work. But the thing I'd say is just go where your passion is. I know it sounds, again, like, something on a cat poster, but it's the truth. Like, the idea is what you want to show an editor and what you want to present is the story and the set of stories that you would be proudest of. So, for me right now, that's literally what I'm trying to do with Best Jacket, with the stuff at Comixology and everywhere, is just do the stories that speak to me. I don't care what genre they are anymore. I'm just doing whatever. And that, if that's where your head's at, is like, I have a Western that I love and I have a romance that I love, and I just want to do those, then do them. If it's, no, my heart's really in horror and I'm going to get pigeonholed, fuck it, then get pigeonholed, because that's what you like to do. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? And then branch out later. That's me. I you want to just putting your best foot forward is being honest. It's being transparent. It's being like, this is who I am, as a writer, and this is what I love to write about. And that's it. Some people have, you and I both know people that have very narrow pathways with that, but are amazing, and I don't mean that as an insult at all. It can be a tremendous strength, people that mine the same territory or have a certain kind of book that they do repeatedly, but do amazingly, and that you see that some of my favorite writers are those people from, people that mine a certain vein, like Ed Brubaker, to Tom King, to, that sort of have a lane that they like to work in, and they work in that lane, and they're amazing at it. And that's that, and that's okay. Like that, tons of people are that, and then if you are more like me, or Jeff Lemire or Jason Aaron, like some of the people or Donnie, like some of the people that I gravitate towards maybe more in terms of style, not that I like the work better, but that I relate to more as a writer. I think I love the idea of the challenge of trying different genres. So I like the idea of I'm a horror writer at heart. I'm an action writer. I like horror. I like big bombastic action and that stuff too. But I want to try romance. So I am with Barnstormers. I want to try YA. So I am with not only Dudley, but another book. And I love Westerns. They're some of my favorites. So, all that. So just whatever it is that speaks to you, you do that. I mean it. Just don't bullshit. People just see through it. Just don't make a bad resume, like a fake resume. Just do what's going to make you happy that you did it. And that's it.
I have a pretty good question. I feel is a good one to end on
sure.
From Ferris, who asked, what is it about artists like Greg that spark creativity in you? And are you looking forward to Spawn Batman in December?
That's a great question. And that's a good ending. Of course I am. And Greg, I've seen a lot of it and it's out of control. And, Greg, and it's something that makes me so happy to see the two of them working together. And, I've been lucky enough to become friends with Todd and their friend. And this is from Todd. I've told this story in my 101, but that page is from when I was 13, my 13th birthday. My dad took me to a New York Comic-Con across from Penn Station, and Todd was there, and I waited like 3 hours for his signature. And I only had a little bit of money saved up to buy a page. And my dad told Todd it was my birthday, and Todd gave me this page, which was way more than I could have paid, and wrote on the back, "Happy birthday, Scott, Joe Spidey." And I told him years later when I met him how much that meant to me and how I'll never sell that page ever and that stuff. But anyway, witnessing their friendship and how much they've helped each other over the years, that's the best part of Batman Spawn to me. I love Batman and Spawn. I can't wait to read it, but it makes me happy to know that my friend Greg is getting to work with his friend and make something really cool that they've been wanting to do for a while. What sparks me about Greg and the people I gravitate towards is always the same to me. It's people that put story first, that get so into the story that no ego, nothing matters but that. I'm the same way. I mean it. I know it sounds, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I'm built for, if you have a better idea than me, I don't give a shit about my idea staying in there. If your idea is better, great, let's put it in. I love people that go to the mat for the story, that think creatively all the time. How do I make this better? How do I make this better? How do I make this better? That Derek Jeter, how do I win? How do I, that nonstop, like, how does this be the best it can be? I might lose, like I might screw it up. But Ty will vouch for me. I've never let an issue out the door in my whole career. I have not tried to make the best that I can. I know that I've failed at times, but I've never phoned it in. Like, there's not one issue that I've ever worked on in my career that I have phoned in. And I'm very proud of that. It doesn't mean that I haven't written terrible issues. I'm sure I have, but it's not for lack of trying. And that's what I look for in collaborators. And I mean, all you have to do is follow Greg for 5 minutes and you see how hard that guy works. And it's not just work, it's working. He'll redo a panel 4 times just to get the tilt of the head right. And I won't even be able to tell until he gets it right that it was wrong, because it wasn't wrong. It looked amazing. He's got all these pages of, like, in metal, of like the Megazord Justice League thing that they all combined to form. And it was amazing. I was like, this is perfect. He's like, it's not perfect. I need to redo it. I was like, it took you 3 days. Redid it. And then the second time it was better. but it was so little better. I couldn't even tell. And I'm like, oh my God, he's right. It's better. But I mean, you would have loved the first one. That's what I love with Greg. Greg, all he cares about is the best story possible. And he's always looking to improve his craft. That's the other thing. You just look at his early work on Batman to the work he does now. And it's not that he was bad then, he was amazing then, but watching the evolution of somebody who becomes more and more comfortable and more ambitious with what they can do. I love that. That's the way Jock, Raphael, Lisa, I mean, Tula, like the people I work with that I continually go back to over and over again, are people like that I know are going to push me to be better because they're always pushing themselves to be better. And that, like, Francis is another big one for me. Manipul, Raphael, like I'll always come back to those guys. And I love finding new people too that I haven't worked with before, that we're going to announce some people soon on things like Hayden Sherman on Wildfires was exactly like that. And a couple people we haven't announced yet, but are young, really new people that I'm super excited to work with, because same thing, the passion and the hunger makes me go to work excited. So how's that?
I think it's pretty great.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, you guys, I can't thank you enough. Like, I really hope you enjoyed it. I mean, this is the way we're going to work this 102, but we'll spend a little bit less time me explaining things, a little bit more time looking at your work, going back and forth, you walking through it bit by bit. So we can really, like, if I was doing that Nation Extra, I would have gone a little bit more page by page, panel by panel in that way. It'll be like that. And then it'll be tailored so that, like this, I was talking about shorts, right? When we talk about your story, I'll still pick a general topic like characterization, or pick something that's like theme, or pick. So I'll always be a tailored lesson with focusing on the thing that's centrally a little bit off. If there is something that I think is the biggest suggestion I have, and then finding a published thing that shows an example or two of how that thing works. So it'll be a combination. It won't just be looking at your stuff. It'll be looking at good published stuff too, but it will hopefully be kind of a big holistic approach to thinking about writing, as something that we can appreciate all the things going right with in everybody's work, and also help make stuff better all the time. So, all right. Thank you guys so much. Thanks, Ty. Ty's the best. And
Thank you.
yeah, so we'll do it again next month. But if you sign up also, there's all kinds of, we're going to start, we'll post the class, and we're going to start posting more stuff about craft and all that stuff too, now that the class is going. We post at least once a week, all kinds of good stuff for paid stuff too. So I hope you'll join up, because it's going to be fun. Great. All right. Good night, you guys.